This week, we continue a look at Christmas films and shorts with one of Disney's lesser-known holiday productions, Don Bluth's 1978 short, The Small One. When Middle Eastern Mowgli travels to Nazareth on Christmas Eve to sell his pet donkey, he must contend with animal rights issues, cultural stereotypes, and a run-in with Jesus' stepdad. Directed by Don Bluth, and if that name sounds familiar to some of you, he is the auteur director that did stuff such as The Secret of Nim, All Dogs Go to Heaven, Land Before Time. This was his directorial debut and his last production for the Disney Studios before he embarked on his own studio quest, which led to The Secret of Nim. So this is one of those holiday specials that has been lost to time. I remember watching it on the Disney Channel when I was a young kid, and it was one of those films nobody ever really talked about. It's getting a little bit more exposure today because it's on Disney Plus, and it being such an atypical Christmas production, I thought this would be a great way to kick off the month of December. Kyle, had you ever seen or even heard of The Small One, despite our mixed up text? And I hope to God you weren't thinking that I was referring to something from Pornhub.
You know, I mean, and the fact that the story revolves around a donkey and there's some creeper people in Nazareth, apparently during the early part of the production, I can see why you would have thought I'd made such a mistake.
Well, at the very least, this film is perfect for the fetish fair for DeviantArt or something.
Now I had the time of my life.
No, I hadn't seen it, but upon the perusing of it so recently after Rocky, I can't help but think that Small One is appropriate in some places where Rocky was a rundown thing that isn't supposed to do as much work at his age, and then suddenly out of nowhere, someone throws some silver in a particular direction, and he follows the star to get his shot to be significant on the landscape
and go the distance. Except with the exception of Apollo, the god, he went with Jesus.
Yes, he stayed with monotheism in this case, and you know that whole situation. Yeah, most of the time you hear me complain that a production does not have a good ending. That is not true here. The ending is very strong, but there's a lot of stuff leading up to you got to sit through to get there, Pon.
When you think of the famous Christmas specials, this was released as a short, which is kind of strange because Disney, that was built on releasing animated shorts, the entire decade of the 1970s, only 2 shorts came out. Winnie the Pooh and Tigger 2, and then The Small One. And it seemed like, at least for the next decade, most of the short releases were 2-reelers, so they ended up being like 20, 30-minute affairs leading up to 1990's The Prince and the Pauper in many ways. It's funny that this came out, 5 or 6 years prior to Disney's other big 2-reeler Christmas special, Mickey's Christmas Carol. But what makes this stand apart from, let's just say, the traditional holiday fare is it actually does take the religious turn. It's not ho 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 and Santa Claus. They're actually telling a religious story. Now, one of the things a lot of people have accused this film, I think I don't agree with this. Most of the time I would, but in this particular case I don't agree with, is that it's Disney's Christian propaganda. Now, which I want to address a little bit. I don't think telling a Christian story necessarily is propaganda. It's just telling the story of a different culture in the same way that Moana talks about Polynesian culture and so forth. Did you feel like with this being a religious heavy production, and that's even debatable, did you feel like the overtones were very strong?
I don't feel like it was strong at all. And actually, you know, if you really didn't pay attention to the lyrics of the opening theme, you wouldn't necessarily pick up it was going to be religious in nature, in my opinion, until maybe he gets to the city and things just kind of fit the right way. I don't know. Like, one could argue it's more of a propaganda for capitalism with the clink, 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 take your money to the bank thing.
I think that's the reason. That scene alone is the reason that it's kind of been brushed aside, because it's been accused of Jewish stereotypes with that scene, which when I was a kid, I just, I'm like, okay, these are the greedy merchants. I didn't make any...
Nothing made them Jewish in and of themselves. And then and by that stereotype, listen, here's where I'll go. If you're worried about anyone getting stereotyped,
it's the donkey.
Well, true. I mean, he did regularly make an ass of himself. That's quite true. Hi-oh! No, I was going to try to come up with a joke there. I ain't got it. I don't have a leg to stand on. Like, there's the opening lyrics. So they use the word God at the end of the opening song, and then the dude doesn't even identify himself as Joseph. All you hear is "wife to Bethlehem." Wait, what? And then at the end, when they see the star, they're about to rejoice with exceedingly great joy. That's it.
There is one tiny aspect of foreshadowing in the middle when he takes the donkey to the auction, and then he says the donkey will be good enough for a king's stable.
That's true.
I thought it was very clever.
It's subtle, yes. And now that you mention it, that's fair to point out as another example, but to call that propaganda, stop.
I don't, the term propaganda is a heavy one, and to call this propaganda, I'm not saying that films that have subtle cues aren't necessarily propaganda. In fact, the subtler sometimes the more effective. But comparing it to today's age, where any kind of agenda is not only made obvious, they hit you over the head with it. The subtlety here is kind of refreshing. In fact, you mentioned that you had trouble getting to a joke. I have trouble making, I started off making fun of it a little bit, but I actually feel kind of bad when I'm making fun of this film because it is charming, it is heartwarming, there is a very human side to the story. I mean, perhaps an old school with a young child working hard, being forced to essentially sell his pets and the issues he has trying to do what his dad told him, which from today's perspective could be considered a cruel thing. He has to sell his friend. There is a theme of sacrifice going through this, sacrifice and friendship, which I guess is appropriate being that it is a Christmas production, especially with this religious theme.
First of all, the only agenda I think was connected with its production was doing something different as a Christmas story, and I think you achieved that. You just unfortunately have a lot of execution issues. Like this poor kid, which I don't think we actually ever get his name, but this poor kid gets scowled at by literally everyone not named Joseph or Small One. Like the other donkeys give this dude a side eye. His dad, just like the gruff looks he gets from him at the beginning of the movie, until he talks, you're pretty sure he's going to get abused with a switch or something.
I didn't get that impression about the dad. I thought
look at his facial expressions, man. Trust me, those are some angry. Those were some angry looks, partner. Anyway,
I don't know. That's the impression. When I was a kid, maybe that's the impression I would have had. I don't remember the father too strongly to give an impression from back then. But watching it now and actually seeing,
if I'm not an adult, I'm good with that.
Yeah, I don't know. Watching it now and seeing it and trying to look at it from his perspective, I thought that he was kinder than a man in that particular time period could have been in dealing with this situation.
And by the time he started talking, he did. Sure, I'm talking right at the very beginning when the sticks and stuff are being dropped. Then he runs into the city guard, who that creepy MF was what made me think, hey, it's 3 shops down. I'm like, that is a Pornhub studio. Okay,
that's the creepy guy. How about the tanner coming out of the darkness with a freaking knife?
Then he gets to the tanner, and you realize you found a way to get a shop worse than the Pornhub studio. And like you said, he with the knife and the and I mean, listen, I'll give Tanner this much credit. I just want his hide, boy, which again is something you might have heard in the Pornhub studio. So, again, it gets confusing. But the kind of mockery that I kind of expected up front was what you got from the auctioneer. So angry dad, creepy guardsman, creepier Tanner, which, I mean, if this was religious propaganda, to the credit of those that think so, that's Satan or Judas with his piece of silver, you know. But at day's end, like the songs that aren't the bankers aren't all that great.
Structurally speaking, I think the beginning is effective and the ending is the soul of the piece. It's the strongest scene. It's what it's leading up to. The middle is a little clunky, perhaps because with the exception of the guard, the biggest threat that he comes up against is the first threat with the Tanner. Structurally speaking, if you were going to put that first, I mean, if you want to make it tragic, at the end of the story, right before he runs into Joseph, it would have had him walking in defeat with the donkey pulling him towards the Tanner so they can make the sale. That would have been tragic.
I thought that's what was happening at first. Yeah. When he was at night and he's dragging his feet and like he's going slow because he's headed towards the Tanner. You know? Something that subtly implied, it wasn't told to me that. I mean, you could argue just the same that wasn't the case, that he was just walking around defeated, you know, delaying getting a beat down from Angry Dad. Fine. Either could be held true.
And I'm not necessarily saying that the order is wrong, because you establish the threat of the Tanner early, but then you establish that threat and then you immediately follow it up with these comical bankers and the auction scene, which is a farce. That section, I do agree. The second act here is very clunky. I think for me, the strength of the ending, and this is, I'm not, you know, we talked a lot about religion here, but I'm not looking at it from the religious point of view. From a story point of view, it not only salvages the film, not to say that it needed salvaging, but it definitely leaves an impact, and perhaps a stronger impact than a 25-minute film about a boy trying to sell his donkey in biblical times had any right to be.
Yeah, well, and all the points you make there, like, you know, not to get too much in the order of things, one thing they established up front is, you know, the kid was given the easy out. He could get his silver, go home, have the rest of the day. And he's like, yo, F that noise. I can't do that. So, you know, they've established that the kid, as much as he loves Small One, is just as devoted to getting the mission done for his dad. So with that weight added, finding this bright-eyed brown man to show up out of nowhere in the middle of the night, you know, which again, I'm realizing I just set up another Pornhub joke. But with Joseph's appearance, air quotes, implied Joseph's appearance, such as it was, his patience to solve all problems and waiting for the right solution is a lesson that isn't even necessarily biblical in and of itself. It's just done with that in the background as implied Joseph and Mary make their way to Bethlehem with Small One in tow, carrying the weight, which, by the way, last I checked, a bunch of sticks don't weigh as much as a pregnant woman. But I digress.
Oh, I mean, she had a miraculous virgin birth. Maybe she was lighter. I don't know.
I mean, so in light of the fact that they did that, there was a workout montage there in Nazareth just before they left that got Small One ready.
I do want to focus on that aspect a little bit. And because for me, growing up, I moved around a lot. I changed a lot of different schools. I went to public, private, etc., almost every denomination you can think of. And if there's one thing that even as a young kid I dreaded, was any kind of biblical production for kids, especially if it was a cartoon, because for everything that this film is accused of by some, those films they were the akin to today's propaganda. They hit you over the freaking head. God forbid there was a joke made in one of these. Laughter, sign of the devil. I have no idea.
Yeah, I mean, at least in Small One, the dude made a joke about the fact that because his wife was so big, he needed a horse, not a small donkey. I'm like, dang,
My argument is that this film imparts whether you take the message as a religious one or not, because this film, even if you take out the religious angle, it's still effective. It's stronger with the religious angle, but still an effective moral. I would dare say that this is more effective as a Christian tale than most of the Christian productions that are made with that very goal in mind. We live in a universe where Bible Man is a thing.
Yeah.
I can't wait for that cinematic universe.
I don't want to hate on this because it's very well intentioned and it's a unique Christmas presentation. It chooses to kind of go more historical, biblical on it, and it's a very unique thing in that way. It doesn't hit you over the head to meet your point. The ending's strong, but it's otherwise forgettable. I don't think as an entry. Like, for one, let's be fair and bring up what it's comparing with, right? Like, the other comparable work is The Christmas Carol. Bro.
It's hard to compete when you have a Christmas Carol where Uncle Scrooge is playing Scrooge.
It's good enough to not be bad, but there's enough bad to keep it from being memorable. So I'm in that gray zone that makes it difficult to evaluate.
It is simple. And I think there's a genuine nature to that simplicity in a way that we kind of talked about last week with Rocky. Not that I'm comparing the small one to the Italian Stallion.
It's so close to being something memorable, and it just isn't.
It's one of those films where I think it's kind of a shame that it's kind of been lost in the shuffle, because, like I said, there's heart to this, and the ending. I know a couple of people who have seen this that tell me that they can't watch it without crying throughout the whole film because they know that ending. So it has affected. It definitely has affected some people. Do you think that, and there are a lot of people that celebrate Christmas that aren't religious. Do you think that this film can still be effective for the non-religious?
Yeah, the possibility for that appeal is there. And because of that aspect, what I would say, the most positive spin I'm going to put on this is, hey, guys, listen, if you want to do Christmas production like this that focuses more on the traditional biblical of it without necessarily being preachy, here's the benchmark. Improve on it and go, and you got something, right?
Let's get to the big question of the evening. Is The Small One required viewing? With the caveat, is it required Christmas viewing?
No, it's not. It's unique. It's something different. If you're getting sick of watching the Christmas Story marathon, you're over It's a Wonderful Life, and you're wondering why people are so dumb they think Die Hard's a Christmas movie, you can throw this in instead for what an actual Christmas production is. I mean, I'm not going to say pass because it's not so bad that you should skip it entirely, but if you're a filmy or you have any sort of cinematic flair or connoisseurship to yourself, there's no surprise that Demos knew of this production when he told me about it, right? So it makes sense that a Demos would watch it. It does not make sense that me, who is the default that's regularly assaulted, would. Am I going to be angry at Demos for making me watch it? No. But it's not something I feel I'm enriched, but I'm not enlightened.
I think of it as the rarest type of Christmas production of its kind. It's an honest-to-God take on the religious aspect of the holiday that's both effective and I would argue entertaining without ramming the belief overtones down your throat. The message is heartwarming and honest I honestly think appeal to all. Now, is it required viewing? No, I don't think it's that strong. If I were to categorize this as a regular film, I wouldn't even necessarily say recommended. It's good for what it is. I wouldn't necessarily say pass. As a Christmas production, I'd recommend it because of its atypical nature. It's effective in its storytelling, and it's different than what you normally get in the commercial onslaught of these crazy Christmas specials. It's a breath of fresh air in many ways.
Yeah, it beats the hell out of Santa Claus the movie, for example. Like, what I'll say is this, Demos. It's a good video for school children, right? In my opinion, or it's a good video for some sort of a religious study. But as far as an entertainment only presentation, no. In a way, it's like a light version of It Belongs in a Museum. but I wouldn't say it's good enough for that. Like, it wouldn't be in your local theology museum. It would be like in the children's museum at Christmas time.
So what you're saying is it belongs in the cave where they found the Dead Sea Scrolls. To be discovered later.
Yes. It should be looked at by top men sometime in the future.
I would say for Christmas, if you're looking for something different, check out The Small One. It's 26 minutes long. It's not gonna be a big waste of your life. It's on Disney Plus, which honestly shocked me. I wasn't expecting The Small One to be on there. Straight up. As a fan of Don Bluth, it definitely has a lot of the characteristics of his productions can be found here, which I find, from an animation perspective or a historical perspective, it's very interesting to check it out for that as well.
Well, you said this was his first directorial, but his last Disney production. That's up there with, like, if you've ever heard the Beatles demo tape, people are like, oh, the guy that projected them was an idiot. He's like, dude, this tape sucked. It's not my fault they got good after that.
We might do a deep dive on Don Bluth later, because his career goes as far back as an animator for Sleeping Beauty. He ended up being the animation director for Pete's Dragon, but this was his first directorial effort. If you're a fan of his, I say check it out. And like I said before, if you're looking for an atypical Christmas production, you could definitely do a lot worse. A lot worse. And for a film of its kind, there are very, very few that I could say have done it better. So where does that leave us?